Good morning, everyone. We want to welcome you to the sixth session on art and history of the neighborhood. This is 6 out of 7 sessions we're doing that comprise the second virtual workshop. Next slide, please. Today, my name's John Schrader. I'm with JHP Architects. I'm going to be presenting with Christina Davis and Jairus Vinette, also with JHP Architects. JHP Architects is an architecture and planning firm that did the redevelopment of Paldo into Brookside with Columbia Residential and Housing Authority, Athens Housing Authority. So you might be familiar with that project. Ian Cara is going to be the moderator. So while Christina and Jairus and I are talking, he's going to be checking the chat board and looking for anybody that wants to kind of jump in and have a comment. We have a special guest. The special guests aren't necessarily presenting anything per se, but we've asked them to be experts, help us answer questions, and have insights. And so our special guests today are Charlie Maddox with the Athens Housing Authority Board. Are you here?
I don't see Charlie right now.
All right. Andrew Salinas with Athens Culture Affairs Commission.
Yep, right here.
I saw you there. All right. Ellen Walker with Ellen Walker Design.
I'm here.
All right, Ellen. And I have a special surprise guest. It's a surprise because I haven't told him yet. Broderick Flanagan. We actually show some of his work in our presentation, and we don't give him credit. So I felt compelled. I saw he's on the phone, and I felt compelled to just call him out and thank him for the work that he's done. He's also been involved in our charrettes and participating. So thank you for joining us, Broderick.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thank you for the acknowledgement.
Next slide.
Hey everyone,
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
By any chance, is Robert Harrison on? No, Dr. Robert Harrison?
I don't see him.
Okay.
I don't see.
Thank you. Thank you.
And White, no, that's fine. If you want to go ahead and text anyone, I know Rick, I saw you probably already texting Mr. Maddox.
I will text Robert.
I'm texting Charlie right now.
Okay.
And I will text Robert Harrison.
Great. And I gave Carol a call-in number, so if they do just want to call in, they can.
Okay.
He should have an email with the registration link from about 2 days ago, I think. All right. Okay. Thanks, Ovita. So my name's Ian Cara. I'm the moderator for the session. I'm with Columbia Residential. So I just wanted to go over a quick couple of housekeeping things because I think a lot of you have been on all 6 Zooms, but there may be some folks who are new to virtual meetings. So first thing, I'm going to ask everyone to sign in through the chat. So there's a chat button at the bottom of your screen, and I see a lot of you have already signed in with your name and email and maybe an affiliation. This is also where you can go to type in any questions and comments you're going to have throughout. Next, these sessions are being recorded, and so if you don't want to be shown on video, you don't have to have your video on. You can mute that. That's next to your mute button. And the sessions are going to be posted on the website later. So if you've missed a session, you can go back and look at it, and you'll be able to comment, and we'll facilitate a discussion there after the workshops. And that website's going to be ndathensplanning.com. We're going to be plugging that throughout the presentation and encourage everyone to go there to follow up from this event. This isn't supposed to be a very formal conversation, and we want it to be a discussion, so you can mute and unmute yourself. So please feel free to unmute yourself, chime in if you have questions and comments, and you can do that non-verbally. If you want to use one of the other tools, there's a little reactions button where you can send us an emoji, or you can chat in the chat box or give us a little wave. The raise your hand button is in the participants chat box. So if you click participants, that's next to that chat button, you'll see a raise your hand button, and one of my colleagues will be checking in on those. So that's about it. We have about an hour for this discussion. So I'm going to turn it back over to John and the rest of the team. Thanks.
All right, next slide. I just want to start out talking about the scope of the planning area that we're looking at. So Bethel Village and the Athens Housing Authority property across from Hoyt, those are the catalyst for this redevelopment. But we've been looking at a larger area. We think it's real important to focus on linkages, connections back to the rest of the community, and then issues like traffic. That is more than just an issue for our side. So we're looking at the issues in a broader context. The area study is bounded on the north side by the railroad tracks. You can see where College Avenue comes in the middle of the railroad tracks there, where the historic depot is. To the right side of the screen, or the west side of the property, is Pulaski Creek. So that's the boundary on that side. And then Doherty Street is along the back and the east side. And that's kind of the scope of the area. Once again, focusing on Bethel Village and the Housing Authority property. That's really where our focus is, but we want as many connections and relationships to the overall community as possible. And once again, also obviously being adjacent to downtown has a big influence. Next slide. Where we are on the schedule, in December, funding was approved. We were all very happy with that. February, we had our first workshop. It was in session or in person on site. Since June through August, we've been working technical meetings, a meeting with the city public departments at the city. We've been doing surveys, and now we are in August doing our second workshop, obviously this virtual workshop. To finish out next month, we're looking at having a conceptual plan. October and November, we will be refining, revising, reviewing the plan, getting comments from the city, from the community. And then in December, we're looking at the presentation of the final plan to the mayor and council. So next, I want to go just real briefly over the work we've done to date. And if you've been on previous sessions, which I know a lot of you have, this intro part is repetitive. So once again, I'm going to kind of go pretty quickly through this. February, we had an in-person charrette. It's very hands-on, a lot of discussions. We'd break up into small groups, and the small groups would discuss, and then the small groups would come back and present to the entire workshop session. Next. Two of the exercises we did, one of them was a word cloud exercise, where the more an issue was repeated, the larger the word comes up in the word cloud. We also had tabletop mapping sessions, once again, breaking up to small groups, letting people have hands-on where things should go, where the problems are, what the issues are, things like that. Next. After the first session, that was obviously February, COVID hit. And so we've had to take a shifted approach to virtual engagement. And one of the things we started with was we were always going to have a website, but our website is much more robust now. And it's really the point of contact that we're using to get feedback from the community. So on our website, we have everything from the first workshop. We're going to put everything from this virtual workshop on there. We have surveys from the community. If you've not been on there, if you haven't been on the website yet, we really encourage you to get on there and take the surveys. It just gives us more information that we can use to where our community can reflect and incorporate elements that the community wants. It's also a place for comments and discussions. If there's something you don't like, feel free to tell us. You know, once again, we want community input. We want the good, we want the bad. So feel free to get on there and give us comments, have a discussion. That's what the website is for. So next. what I'm going to look at now is the work that we did in between workshop 1 and workshop 2. So first of all, we came back to the office, kind of took all of that information and started kind of listing ideas that we had and then issues that we heard. So we ended up with 6 key issues and themes. And these 6 themes are what this second virtual workshop has been all about. So our first one was complete streets. We talked about open space, civic parcels, all the way down to today we're doing art and history. We also started just doing some really rough sketching. And this is just kind of, what we like to call, what if. So what if this, what if we did this? What if we did this? What do you think about that? So just, once again, just really rough sketches. You put trace paper on top of trace paper. Multiple people are working on it. Someone sketches on someone else's. Next slide.
Hey, John, you might also, this is a good point to interject. Everything we're showing is sort of conceptual, big picture. Nothing is decided at this point. Everything we're showing is just what ifs, and we're asking for input. So please, nobody feel like we've made decisions or anything. These are just big picture. See what sticks on the wall.
This is the last slide before we move into our actual topic. Really just what I wanted to talk about as far as planning, some of the things that kind of kept coming up that we are pursuing, and kind of give us a heads up, stop if it's not true, but kind of reestablishing a street grid. To have the more connection to the site. One of the issues was people felt that they were kind of stuck at the back of the site sometimes. So we think more streets, more connectivity would help. The other thing was green spaces. A lot of different types of green spaces, small green spaces, large green spaces, how to and how do we want these green spaces to be used and where do we want them located? The other thing we're looking at is obviously mixed income. That is one of the determinants that we will have affordable housing on site. Christina can talk about the data on that. And then we're also talking about mixed use, like along College, maybe some offices, some things maybe besides residential, but possibly mixed use. Mixed use definitely in the overall plan, but even maybe mixed use on some of our sites that we're particularly looking at. All right, so we're getting into art and history now. Once again, we are encouraging as much as possible for people to participate. This is one of the areas that we really feel that it's the most important for the neighborhood and the community to let us know your history, because we don't particularly know the particular of your history. And then also kind of art, obviously that ties into culture. We would love to hear your feedback on what you want as far as art and how to incorporate it and how to incorporate the history through art. With that, I was going to let Christina take over and talk about the history.
Thanks, John.
Christina, before you start, I don't know if Charlie Maddox has been let in or not. He was saying, send me the password.
He did. I was going to acknowledge that Charlie has joined us. That happened while John was talking. So Charlie, are you on?
Oh, Charlie.
He's on mute right now.
Let me unmute him for him. Let's see. Oh, where is he? Charlie? I let him in.
I see him all the way down at the bottom.
At the bottom. It's not.
Yeah, he's showing on my screen, but muted.
He can unmute himself. Everyone here can. Oh, let me see if I can do it for him. Unmute. Unmute. It's not letting me unmute him. Charlie, can you unmute yourself? May Walter is joining as well. That's great. Charlie? Walter. I can't unmute him for some reason. I think he's gonna have to do it.
Hey,
Mr.
can
Maddox,
Ian-
if you have a
He's
mouse.
he's an experienced Zoomer, so
Oh, okay.
my guess is he's maybe just having technical problems. I'm gonna tell him to go out and come back in again if you look for him when he does.
Yeah.
Christine.
Absolutely.
Sometimes that works. So if,
I would like to just pause until he joins team because this is more of a conversation. And I don't want to present without one of our guests.
no, that's great. And this is a time, obviously, if you joined us late, I hate to say you haven't missed anything, but you missed the introduction that we did on the other sessions. So we're about to start the discussion point on the history and then art. And so were there any questions in the first part that anybody wanted to ask or discuss or have any questions about or comments?
Hey, remember, these are all going to be loaded up and people can comment and look at them, you know, really carefully later too.
Yeah, for some reason, so like Jairus, this is different setting for some reason in this call, but Jairus, I just muted you. You're gonna have to unmute yourself. It won't let me unmute again. So Charlie's gonna have to unmute himself.
Hey, and
I
the other
think I
thing,
was joking.
well, remember, we're trying to translate a charrette workshop environment virtually. So please, this is informal. Please speak up and
So we have a
comment.
question. We have a question in the chat. What the definition of affordable housing is?
Christina, do you want to define?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes. So yes, affordable housing, there's a lot of different ways to think about that. I was just trying to get Charlie back on. Saturday morning is challenging my multitasking abilities.
He keeps saying he needs a password. I'm just gonna call him now, okay? I'm talking through it.
Okay. And Ian, maybe if there's something you want to text to Rick. All right, we've got somebody else trying to join too that's having technical problems. I hope nobody has a hard stop this morning. I do want to make sure we get folks that are trying to get in. We haven't had any tech problems thus far. I have an artist neighborhood lead.
You jinxed us.
I know. Latasha, are you in there? Hey, is she video or trying to just call in?
Video.
And did she register?
Yes, I think Ms. Oviedo registered for her.
Okay. There is a number. Folks can at least use the number. Let's see.
Well, even when we have in-person charrettes, a lot of times there's some things that crop up there.
Wait, we're translating the full experience, right?
Okay, so I'm gonna chat the number for anybody that needs to at least call in separately. And I know it's not ideal, but we're gonna do whatever we can to get.
All right, I just spoke to him on the phone, so he's working on it.
All right, I see Mr. Robert Harrison has joined. Hello. All right, Latasha, I put in the chat the number.
Christine, I think you need to add a meeting ID as well.
It is in the invites.
Yeah, I sent him the meeting ID and the
Okay.
link.
Latasha, do you have the meeting ID?
I have it. I'm sending it in the chat.
Thank you. All right, I see Charlie's in again. Charlie, are you on?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Hey, yes.
Yeah.
Figured that out. All right, and then Latasha, the meeting ID is in the chat.
Christine,
Okay.
I know you acknowledged about Dr. Harrison on, but I wanted to make sure I gave a shout out because I see him and I think he'll be very valuable to this conversation.
Yes, I've heard that will be the case. And we've got Mr. Maddox, we've got, I wanted to acknowledge some other folks that just joined in, but for some reason this is not letting me see everybody I want to. Did Corinne Walter join? And you could unmute yourself.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
All right. All right, Latasha, do you think I could go ahead and go? Did this person, your contact, get in?
Go ahead. I'm still working with it. You can go ahead and start that.
Okay.
Before we dive into the topic, I wanted to go back to Ellen's question about our definition of affordable housing.
Thank you. I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Yeah.
You're balancing a lot.
I know, yeah. So I apologize, Ellen. A definition of affordable housing, there is a federal definition of what is technically affordable housing based on an individual's income and a percentage of that income that can be spent on housing that includes utilities. And that's typically calculated as 30% of the income. And so that is the definition from a federal perspective. From another perspective, one could just look at it in a more broad sense of what is, and so I would say that that also changes based on area median income. So that's specific to the area that you're living in. I want to acknowledge that there's an existing affordable housing restriction on the Bethel property right now, and that will be maintained. It's a land use restriction, and that will be maintained and actually extended throughout the redevelopment. So a commitment of the dollars as an affordable housing project sponsored by SPLOST is that every single affordable housing unit that is currently there, which actually has direct federal HUD Section 8 vouchers. Those are not portable vouchers, it's a different program, but they have that funding subsidy with them. The 190 will maintain on the site. Those are not portable, they don't leave the physical area. And what will happen is that there will be another, again, we don't know the exact unit count, but let's call it another 200 units that will be reserved for families making 60% of the area median income or less. And then outside of that, there's usually what we call unrestricted market units. So it's not necessarily market rate in the sense, we just unrestrict them. So they're not restricted by the low-income housing tax credit program. So those individuals could make at any income level. Does that answer your question? And I'm an affordable housing geek, so I'm more than happy to chat with anybody who would like to talk more about it.
And as far as
Christine,
yes,
that definition and explanation that you have given, can we add that on your website or some definition that people can look at on a regular basis, and it will help us also to be able to explain it to the people we come in contact. But can that be listed as some information on the website?
I think that's a fantastic idea. We actually got feedback earlier in the sessions also to add some related planning places. So like Jackson Street Art Walk continued to come up. So could we link to that since it's adjacent to us? And so people may want to go look at that set of plans as it relates to this master plan. And I think you're right. We need to nail on the head some links and definition of affordable housing. For sure.
And I was going to just point out, design-wise, all of the units are identical. There is no affordable units and market rate units. They're all mixed together, and they all have the same quality of finishes and interiors.
Okay. So I am more than happy to stay on. We're hosting the ladder call at noon, so I'll be here all morning. But I'm going to go ahead and start this conversation about the history of the site. So I'm going to hide a little bit here so I can see. Before I get started, I just wanted to let you know that the purpose of this is we're going to show a little bit of what we have collected, the information we've collected thus far. This is in no means expected to be comprehensive, and we actually have guests here that are gonna, I'm hoping, chime in and give us the scoop, right? So I've been researching all that I can as a project manager, talking to folks, Mary over at Hargret, and a lot of you on this call I've reached out to, trying to learn a little bit more about the history of the site. And so I want to acknowledge up front the gaps in information and hope that this is the start of a conversation that we could continue. So why are we interested in it as master planners and developers? I want to say that we're not just interested in the history of a place because that is a good thing to know and to acknowledge, but it also actually creates a good place. A place with character and a place that acknowledges and honors its history is an important one. So that can happen in a variety of ways. You can acknowledge the history of a place by, I mean, many of you may have seen, like, street names would be a typical way to do that. You could always name something after somebody. You could maybe more overtly preserve a building. I know the Linden House has been preserved nearby, and the train depot. And there are a lot of variety of ways in which the master planning or architectural elements could be integrated into a development which honor the history of a place. Another maybe less overt way would be the alignment of streets. So that's really what we're trying to look at, is the physical history of the land that was there. I might also throw out that you can go ecological with it, right? And you could restore native landscapes and historical landscapes. And so I just want to throw all that out there. Today we have proposed, and it does not have to be the only way, but we have proposed utilizing public art as a vehicle in which we could honor the history of this site, of this area of Athens. It is by no means the only way. And so I want to acknowledge that as well, and we're open to many ideas. So with that, I'm going to click through a couple of slides and probably kick it a lot to our guests to help fill in the blanks here. I'm not going to read it precisely, but I'm going to just let you know that from my research, there are two areas, two neighborhoods that were historically established in what we are calling the North Downtown area. By the neighborhoods, it should have been, I'm sorry, I think this slide is maybe not updated, but it was Lickskillet and the Bottoms. So I don't think this got fully updated. I'm sorry, I'm seeing chats too. But I would like to know, if you could go next slide. I would like to ask, I did find some imagery of the Bottoms. It was quite a broad map. And so I'm curious if anyone could identify now or later the exact line in which Lickskillet ended and the Bottoms started. Does anybody have that information?
Hey, Christina, this is Kelly Gertz.
Hey.
How are you?
Okay.
Good, good.
How are you?
I made a call about that question this week.
Great.
And spoke to one of the early postal delivery carriers in this area who I used to work with. And he roughly said that the area that is now Bethel Midtown Village was the Bottoms, and that Lickskillet was the area that surrounded the Linden House.
Linden House, okay.
So that was that perspective. So he's probably in his mid-80s.
That's good to know. At least there's some marker. That was my guess, but I'm clearly not the expert here. And so what I'm pointing out here is that there was a lot of privately owned parcels. Warsaw Street ran through what is currently Bethel. So you can see Lumpkin also ran through. So Warsaw came from Hull Street, terminated into Lumpkin. Lumpkin actually was a north-south spine that went through the entire site. And you had College Avenue on the eastern side. Madison actually, okay, so Madison stopped. It came from where it is now, is that between the Indigo, right? And it stopped on College. It didn't actually come through the entire site. Next slide. Okay. So I don't think this is the updated presentation, but I'm gonna go with it and hope that some of the cool imagery that I got gets to the screen somehow. So we're gonna go with it, and maybe Ian and John, y'all can figure out if this is the presentation I sent yesterday. But I think everybody's very aware of the train depot itself. And that was established in 1891. It was actually established, as I understand it, to really, it was a thoroughfare, right? So College Avenue was where people would get off the train and then they would be shuttled to the university. Next slide. Okay, so we've got a little mixture of imagery here.
I think some of these got out of order. I apologize.
It's okay. We're going to go with it. So we've got, again, this is an aerial of where I tried to show the street grid network and the community that was there in the early 1900s. And then you can see how the pattern changed with the development of Bethel. And I think you can see where I was talking about Madison running through here from North Jackson to College and terminating. Strong did come all the way through. And Ellen, could you speak a little bit? I think you and I were talking about the history of Strong and kind of the character of that street.
Well, Strong was a really important part of this area, and when it got redeveloped, it was truncated. The other thing that happened is that the state wanted the road to the Doherty to angle up to become North Avenue to connect to what would be the new loop. So a lot of the area was changed because the state acquired that land to create a more direct route up to the what would become the loop bypass. But Strong Street had a lot of businesses. It had the parsonage for First AME Church, a lot of homes. It was a pretty active street for the community. So it kind of lost its function when the urban renewal from 1961 to 1970, that whole decade, everything was demolished and changed.
Absolutely. And I think one could look at it from an urban planning perspective and understand some of the reason why too. Just from a connectivity perspective, Strong used to go all the way to Pulaski. And now it does this weird dogleg and kind of just joins with Lumpkin and dead ends in the North Hole and doesn't see itself all the way through. And so it's not really traversed. A dead end street is usually not very traversed. So when we talk about street grids, I just want to point out the changes that occurred over time. Next slide. So again, this was the area I was talking about. Is I found this larger map of the bottoms. It didn't really define what was the bottoms versus like Skillet, but I wanted to show that we seem to be in the bottoms. So I'm glad, Mayor Kelly, that you were able to get some oral history there, and maybe it's confirming that. Next slide. Okay, so I want to say that in the 1960s, there was the College Avenue Urban Renewal Project, and I was able to find some really interesting photos of what the neighborhood did look like prior to urban renewal. Next slide. This was entitled The Bottoms Unknown. So I guess that nobody really identified the street specifically or the angle that it was taken. Perhaps some of you locals could fill me in on that. But that title was unknown, but the bottoms. Next slide. Next slide. And so obviously, Ellen, as you mentioned, eventually after urban renewal, Bethel Village was developed in '71. We were able to find an old photo of the actual construction of Bethel Village here on the right, and you can see the area that it encompasses there on the left. Next slide. So before we jump into this one, I actually just wanted to go back to one of the historical photos and open up for conversation and a little bit of storytelling here with our special guests that are on the call. So is there any reaction to very, very high level, and dare I say elementary review of the history of the site that I just provided? I'd love to have some commentary from Mr. Maddox or Walker.
Well, one thing we can look at, Bethel Homes opened in 1969.
Okay, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
Most of the, so our physical needs assessment said 74, and then I found this record that says 71, and now I'm hearing 69. So this is really interesting.
I lived there in 69.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember you telling me that at lunch.
And I lived there even up until I can't remember the year that we had the big explosion there.
Charlie, talk a little bit about that. That's an interesting story.
Yeah.
There was I think, Texaco oil storage between Bethel and Pulaski. I'm gonna go text because I can't remember, but I don't remember the date exactly. I can look it up. But there was a big explosion, and it knocked down a lot of. It affected some of Bethel homes. It damaged a lot of the buildings there.
What year did you say that?
I would say that had to be 72 or 73.
Got a newspaper article, I think from July 1970.
Interesting.
Just a little earlier.
What, you're talking about the blast?
Yeah.
Where was that depot again? Pulaski and what? Between Pulaski and Mr. Maddox?
Between Pulaski and Lumpkin leading down to the bottoms. It was almost in front of First AME Church.
Dr. Harrison, can you tell us any commentary on what we've reviewed so far?
Right now I'm just taking in, the historic, information you have. I could, at some point, I can talk a little bit more broadly about some, about the role of First AME being in that community and the kinds of activities that took place, and a lot of the people that were associated, with the church and their impact on the community, educationally, culturally, artistically, that those kinds of things. So I suppose that once we move into, what the vision is and what the possibilities are, I could share a lot more. Historically I could, as well, but
absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've got a mark. Somebody's taking notes, right? To follow up with Mr. Dr. Harrison. Okay.
So anyway, as Mr. Maddox was saying, you had the explosion, but also, on Strong Street, that whole area before urban renewal, you really had a thriving neighborhood. You had the bottom, of course, the least of us were trying to make it, but you also had along Strong Street and some other areas that you had some people that were quote unquote doing well. One of the most preeminent people that were associated with First AME was William Decker Johnson. He wound up, he was a minister, but he also was prominent in the AME church, wound up being president of one of the colleges in South Carolina. But the point I want to make about him is that he came in the early 1880s and wound up making a tremendous impact. He was fluent in German, very talented musician. Some of the older people spoke about tremendous home he had and the tremendous library he had. So he was a man of, great learning. In fact, the documentation shows that he even shared some of his expertise in German by tutoring some of the newly arriving Jewish immigrants to Athens. Just a tremendous person. Then of course, you had Mr. James W. Davis, talented musician as well. He was there. He was also one of the teachers at the former Old Knox Institute. The church itself also played a role as being a center before the Opera House was built. It served as a role, for graduations, for a lot of cultural events. And so historically, as I was saying, it played a great role. So now with, with the current plan in developing the area. I can speak more to that, maybe some ideas, or maybe to add on what's already been visualized, you know, for the area. Maybe the role of what the church could, role it could play, you know, its people, its physical structure in terms of promoting the art, education, and cultural development of the residents that eventually, you know, will continue to occupy, you know, that area.
Thank you so much.
Right.
I'm really excited. I honestly, Brian and I were joking about how way too far into the history I was finding myself, and I really enjoy learning the history of place. So I'm excited to reach out to you, Dr. Harrison. Any other comments before we jump into the rest of the slides we do have today? Any areas that we need to be digging, researching? We would really like to understand from y'all how we actually integrate the history of the place. And I think that there's a period of time in which we need to look to you locally to define that history for us. And then we can work in ways to help honor that history within the redevelopment.
Well, one thing about the Bottoms as it became known, it was an extension of the Hot Corner area. If you notice, Hot Corner was up there, and it ran.
You want to go to that image?
Yeah, and it ran all the way down to the Bottoms.
Really? So on the slide right now, do you see we've got Hot Corner identified? You're saying it went all the way to
Well, Hot Corner kind of stopped at Pulaski, and then not Pulaski, at Doherty, and then as you crossed it, it went down the hill. After you passed First AME, that was the area known as the Bottoms. And I guess because it was at the bottom of the hill.
Okay. Jairus, I guess this is a great spot for you to start. We're already on the slide.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jairus Vanette. I work for JHP Architecture and Urban Design. And it's good to see, you know, some familiar faces like Dr. Harrison and, you know, Mr. Charlie Maddox. But like we just were saying, the Hot Corner was a great example of African-American business district and a historical cultural hub of diversity and entrepreneurship in the area. And there are other examples in the area like the Athens Attica Institute. And all of these that we're showing are just, you know, a couple that were listed, but, you know, you guys can name a lot more that we don't know anything about, but, you know, with you guys' help, you know, we can get that labeled and, you know, acknowledge that. And all of these are just within a 5-minute radius walking distance of the area. And, you know, from my time visiting in February, I just noticed that you guys have an energy about you guys, and there's something special going on.
Let me jump in now and say there's one person that's very familiar with this area because they actually live down there. You know, all the time when we're talking about history, we don't want to get all of it, but the Bottoms was kind of a restricted place. You had to know somebody. You just because you're African American, you can just lollygag in it. You had to kind of know somebody down there. And why are you down here? Pastor Charles Knox lived down in the Bottom, and he grew up down there, and he has a lot of information on almost the daily things that went on there.
That's good to know, Mr. Charlie.
Because if we just, you know, we really want to get it all. I don't know about Dr. Harrison, but I was forbidden to go to the Bottom, and I had a friend down there. You know, they had a pool room. They had 2 or 3 bootleggers. They had a lot of stuff that, you know, the first thing they told you, don't go down there. So just like they told me don't go, I had to go then. See what they doing down there. But that was kind of as I say, Hot Corner was the place. It was the explosion of African American business and everything you wanted. But then as you went on down there, you said, okay, let's go on down here. And it was just a no, you know, past First AME. Now on Strong Street, that was a very, I don't know if it's Henry or one of his brothers. His name was Strong. And he went on to be a brilliant teacher, college professor. And I think there's some of those descendants still around. They lived on Strong Street. Because I always was amazed when we were in high school that your last name is Strong, and you live on Strong Street. So we gave that street to them.
I just also at the same moment that Charlie was mentioning about the bottom, I also was sending a chat that if the bottom, and it should be, is a topic, yeah, Charles Knox is the person that really could give us some more education. I do have his information, Christine, I can get it to you. But yeah, he is, when he talks about it, it's just like you're there today.
Yeah, he has the first-hand knowledge, not what somebody told him.
Is there, I'm gonna ask, as locals joining us on the call, is there an oral, I don't know what resources are at UGA, but is there any kind of effort collectively to capture the oral history or collections on the history of the bottoms while folks are still living to tell it?
Charles was actually interviewed by somebody some years ago. So he, and I believe it was recorded. We could check with him, but he was recorded on an interview several years ago.
And I believe he has a book coming. I thought there was a book to be published from that, Ovita. I don't remember if I ever saw the book, because I would have bought it if I did. But he did tell me that there was a book that he was writing about it. So that should be a part of our history too. In answer to your question about oral histories, I think several people in the community have been collecting oral histories, not specific to the bottom or any particular thing, but just trying to capture the African-American oral histories of Athens Clarke County. That effort is underway by the University of Georgia.
Charlie, and Linda, when we're talking about the early families in Bethel, wasn't Mr. Billups one of those early families in Bethel? Do you remember?
Are you talking about Ron Billups?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was in there when the explosion happened. I remember his daughter was trapped in there, and he and I went back to get her.
Wow.
Ron Billups. And again, I was one of the first, second, third people to move in there, and we had a lot of African-American students at UGA that lived there. Mm. And because they did meet the income level and all of that. So as we look at it, back then it was 2-bedroom was $90, 3-bedroom. No, 1-bedroom was $90, 2-bedroom was $100, and 3-bedroom was $110. Those were the rates.
Those prices.
How long ago would you remember the
Okay, so wait a minute. What was the minimum wage? $1 what? Thank you. $1.65 if I remember.
$1.25. $1.25.
All right, we have some amazing chat going on too. So I know, Ian, you're watching it. I know we were going to save all the chat because we got a lot of information coming in there.
Great stuff.
Yep, we have a lot of resources on accessing some oral histories and engaging with UGA.
I think this really dovetails nicely into what we're talking about. So just broadening the idea of what public art and history can do. We've got some experts on that on the call. So I just want to acknowledge that we're really excited about this. And again, knowing the physical history of the place. I mean, we can see from maps, the road networks. We are beginning to put together some pictures for any kind of architectural influences. Again, we're not going vertical at this stage. We are master planning, but we will be setting tone for what will come up vertically. And so I think whether it be landscape architecture or the architecture of buildings or types of green spaces, honoring the physical history of the land as well. What we're talking about a lot here is the oral history and the cultural history, and we're looking to the Athens community to really define how they want that to be interpreted in this development.
Again, as we look at that, let's be reminded that this area and a lot of areas that we occupied, it was what it was. Let me put it like that. It was not the best, but it was where we lived, and oftentimes we didn't have the access to all the other things that communities had, and people that lived there did the best that they could in that situation. It was not always, wonderful. It was not always, even modern, but this is where we were kind of forced to make it.
To that end, I'm curious about Lick Skillet. I've heard it now since as an adult in Athens. I never heard that growing up, but like you, Charlie, I wasn't allowed to go to the bottom. And unlike you, Charlie, I did not disobey my parents, so I've never been to the bottom. But I did hang out at Bethel Homes when it was created quite a bit. So yes, my brother-in-law lived there as well, but as a student at Georgia. Tell me, the Lick Skillet, it seems like these communities, are they overlapping, or is that a line of demarcation? Is that where the segregation ended or started or whatever? Because the bottom is a segregation era definition, I think, of this area, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
Okay, and so I don't think we skirt that. I think that has to be a part of the conversation so that we can recognize that there was this duality, if you will, in terms of existence in this community. And so that defined a lot of the movement and the freedom of movement, because it's hard to, Broderick, I noticed, mentioned something in the chat about his neighborhood, Newtown, and you can't separate Newtown from any part of the African-American community, because that was our swimming pool. The only public place we had to swim, and that was our only public recreation park that we could go to. And so that is how I think the Black community got to know somebody that didn't live in their particular little enclave, if you will.
Broderick has mentioned that there's also an oral history work that was paused by COVID, but Broderick, can you tell us a little bit about what was the scope of that, or when that might start back up or be available?
I can tell you a little bit about it. Christian Lopez, he works in the Special Collections Library over at UGA, and him and one of his graduate assistant students had started doing some oral history interviews, and they noticed that a lot of them, it wasn't a diverse pool of interviews that was being done. So they began to reach out to some of the African Americans in Athens who knew that history, like Reverend Killian and a host of others. And so that Athens Oral History Project kind of was the foundation for that. And then it kind of branched off into the Athens African American Oral History Project, which he brought in myself and Fred Smith and a few other people. And they wrote a grant, which we were going to be paid through the grant to do interviews and capture interviews. And I think last November was the last time we really kind of talked about.
You was a rock star, you know that, right?
Talked about the program and process of that. So we
I'm on
some feedback. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so around November was when we kind of like hashed out a strategic plan to kind of move forward with that work. And we're going to do it like this spring, but then COVID hit and kind of everything got halted. So, but we may pick back up with that at some point, maybe virtually.
Is continuing that. We're now in planning for the Mount Pleasant Baptist Church Oral History for its 151 years here in the same spot in Athens, Clarke County. And so we're kicking that off now and trying to begin to move around the communities. This is also in conjunction with the project by Dr. Barbara McCaskill, who is working under a grant as a result of the university's interest in starting to capture the African American experience in Athens, Clarke County. So she is working with Christian to take portions of that, and she is looking at the Brooklyn community in her research. And so that will be the next thing documented. And I'm really excited about that because that's going to tell the rest of the story of around Columbia Brookside.
Is that Miss Linda, is that Linda Davis speaking?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm just trying to track so we can follow up. Also, we have Tommy Valentine that has had his hand raised for a while. We've had such good conversation, but I want to call on Tommy.
Hi. So first of all, thanks to allowing us to be here on behalf of Historic Athens. So just a couple things. First of all, I'm really encouraged by the interest that you're showing in local history. And I know that there were lots of questions about that 1947 video. I know I shared the link. I saw Mark shared the link. I encourage everyone on here to check it out, especially once you get past around the 24-minute mark. You're going to see video footage of Newtown, the Newtown School, the area that are now the apartments off, not Addyville, but the apartments that are farther up closer to Barber Street that have been converted to apartments. But the Lickskillet Bottoms area is captured on film with the residents in that area if you follow that link. Really incredible.
That's the YouTube one that you put on the
yeah,
chat?
that's the Peabody and Brown collection link. And so I definitely wanted to share that. For now, my quick comment is, there's so many people on this call that have great expertise or personal history with this area. But before we ran out of time today, since I know that the name of this session was about Artlets and neighborhood history, I'm thrilled that all of us are interested in that history, but I haven't heard much on how we're going to try to translate that history into action on the site. So, are we, planning are we planning parks that are going to honor past residents? Are we talking about a mural project with someone like Project? I think speaking on behalf of Historic Athens, we're happy to work with a lot of the stewards on this call to try to compile a bunch of information. And some of that's actually available in a video session we did as part of the virtual history conference 2 weeks ago. There's an hour session that touches on a lot of these topics. But I'd love to hear more.
Can you send that? I'm sorry.
I'm happy to send that. I think all the information you need is here, and a lot of people on the call can provide it for you. I just don't want time to slip away before we talk about what the discussions have been like about how that might be put into action on the site.
The one thing that I do want to encourage you to do is to reach out to Pastor down there, because he knows, he lived it. So if we could get him on that, he could give us insight into what happened and what didn't happen down there, what's truth and what's not.
I think you're right, Mr. Maddox. We've got so many resources. Y'all have been so helpful in the chat function alone. And then of course this is recorded. Tommy, I'll definitely reach out to you. We would like to, Ian, if you can make a note of that. We got to reach out to a lot of folks after this. We are looking for local partners. Again, we're not historians. You clearly have the expertise there. But I think what Tommy just brought up is a great point to pivot. And I know we have Andrew Salinas and others on the call from the Cultural Arts Commission, is how do you really explore the integration and the intersection of a place's history and art? And again, I don't know, Tommy, if you were at the beginning, but there are a lot of different ways we can honor the history. And we're going to suggest public art in a variety of forms. Jarius, I don't know that we need to hit on everything too much just because of time, but if you want to flip through and just describe a little bit of the imagery you have, you or John, I'm sorry, I don't remember who's presenting it, but these are some ideas. We're looking to the local community. I mean, we're open to that. And Andrew, I also want to make sure before the time's up that we review the great public art policy that is there in Athens and how to fund that through the SPLOST projects.
Yeah, Jairus, why don't you go ahead and go through these next slides that we wanted you to present about different places and options where we can incorporate art into the community.
Yes, sir. Like Mr. Tommy said, providing places in the development for a conversation, or just implementing Artlets, which, if you didn't know, which is like a small part of joining together architecture and art. So having a conversation, possibly having a cup of coffee, discussing this history, discussing artwork, and just having a place for the community to come to and just spend time outside enjoying that great Georgia weather that you guys have.
Well,
Hey, Jerry.
I want one thing I think needs to be really looked at, that there's relevant art there, not just art.
Yes, sir.
But art pertaining to that situation, art pertaining to the history, art that will be reflective of what went on there, who lived there.
Yes, sir.
Exactly.
Hey, that's exactly. Hey, Jerry, I just want to point out that, hey, some of these reflect exactly that, Mr. Maddox. This was planning we did in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and we incorporated some of that cultural and social history. In this case, this was a mill town and textiles. And so it's finding what's important, but then translating it into the place.
Yeah.
But let me you really need to get in touch with Charles Knox. He can give you firsthand information about things that, frankly, went on that some of us don't know went on.
So Commissioner Thornton has actually just said that she was talking to Charles. I guess that's who you were calling a rock star, Miss Evita. And that we've already got his number. So I think we're on a good path.
Next slide.
Okay. And instituting murals, which are a product of its surroundings, like Mr. Charlie just said, reflecting on the place's history and its culture. Athens has characteristics about it that make it special and one of a kind, and we just want to highlight on that. And there's already great examples in the community by its local artists like Mr. Stan Mullins, and even Broderick himself have installations around Athens and the downtown Bethel Village that would just make it a nice place to visit and just, walk around and see. Next slide, please. There are other forms of installations like a bus stop. No matter if you're within the structure or just passing by in the car or in the vehicle, just being able to incorporate design, artistic design in public locations so that it creates a positive vibe in the community and brightens up the whole neighborhood.
Yeah, and we know Athens already has a history of artists working with the bus stop. So that would be a great opportunity to incorporate the history into the bus stop also.
On the bus stop with Athens, we have like a schedule that Transit works with putting up the new artistic bus stops. We have already spoken to them, and that area right in front of the Neighborhood Health Center is one of the areas that we've already designated, but we're holding back. So maybe there is a conversation since this has started. So that area was designated by the in front of the Neighborhood Health Center to put up a creative type bus stop. But I think we're trying to wait now to see how this develops along. So I think that we need to make sure we reach back to Butch and see where we are or where we want to be. But Butch would be a good person with the bus transit to follow up with. Can I just say hey to Jairus? Hey, Jairus.
How you doing?
Hey, Miss Evita, we actually had Butch on yesterday, and he brought up exactly that they have a program they've identified, but they actually wanted to be a partner and wanted to wait, and so they can incorporate and work with the master plan where things would go. So thank you for reminding us.
So
we have a really great chat. Oh, go ahead, Ian.
Yeah, I was just going to call attention to the chat where Broderick wanted to share an idea, and sounds like the Cultural Affairs Commission is also aware of this idea, so I just wanted to let our presenters know. I don't know how much we have as far as the presentation, but I really wanted to get to giving Broderick the floor.
Would now be appropriate time, or?
Yep, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely want to acknowledge the Bethel residents, the current residents that are there now. With their blessing, I would love to present this idea. The idea was something I borrowed from a community up in Atlanta, Georgia. There was and this idea is just a conceptual idea, but I wanted to kind of float it out there. And there was a redevelopment about to happen near downtown Atlanta. And what happened was, it was like a big warehouse. I think it was called Conklin or something like that. But that space was up for demolition and redevelopment. And so what happened before it was actually demolished, there were artists that recreated or, used that space and turned it into a art center. And basically they had different artists from around town come in and do like installations, paintings, murals, all types of different art. So I wanted to borrow an idea of that project and bring it to Athens and maybe incorporate it into the timeline of the Bethel redevelopment. And I want to incorporate the residents though in a special way, as well as art history, and bringing in local artists as well as more renowned artists, and having some of the residents assist the artists and get paid. You know, I put that as part of the budget, and potentially get paid to help the artists, as well as another engagement piece could be that some of the art that's put into the space before the buildings are demolished and then redeveloped, the residents could have a democratic process where they choose a piece of art, whether it be a sculpture or a mural or a certain type of art that's in one of the spaces that we use. And that piece of art could be potentially turned into a permanent piece of art by one of the artists. Like I said, and that would be up to the residents there to be able to choose what they want to see in terms of where they will be living, the type of art. And like I said, we can connect that to the history. In the proposal that I've written up, I have in there that we could have lectures given by local historians right there on the site about the history. We can have workshops with students where I teach them how to paint portraits, and have other artists come in and do workshops as well. So that's kind of the gist of the idea. And like I said, a bulk of the funding would go towards paying residents to help assist the artists in prep work and clean up. Yeah, like Kiyoshan, I like that, a Black Museum of Art.
That's right.
So yeah, there are a lot of different ideas like that that could be incorporated into a project like this. And it is very temporary, but some components of it could be turned into a more permanent structure that could be funded through SPLOST, because I know SPLOST dollars can't fund temporary projects. So I think that's why Andrew was saying that we can potentially, you know, try to raise funds privately or identify another funding source that could come from, you know, this opportunity.
So I want to pivot to Andrew. Maybe you could tell us a little bit on the restrictions. I know there's a 1% SPLOST that goes into public art, temporary versus not. You got to unmute.
Sure thing. Let me introduce ACAC and how our art process works with a typical SPLOST project, and I'll try to do this in 2 minutes. So we're a volunteer group that makes recommendations on public art initiatives to the mayor and commission. And then when the mayor and commission say, yeah, let's do this thing, we do a lot of work related to the specific project. So we have 1% of all capital SPLOST projects. So those with actual brick and mortar construction are earmarked towards public art that is meant to enhance that specific site. For each different project, we have a group of key stakeholders on a site that tell us what kinds of art they want at the site, and then lead the selection process when we get art proposals for a specific project. So our SPLOST project, the SPLOST referendum was the art component too, was meant to fund permanent art. So there are certain key aspects of this project that involve creative placemaking that should be done on the site that can't be funded solely by ACAC. A project of this magnitude, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 million. So in theory, our 1% for art for this site is 1% of that. It's 350,000, right? That's a lot. It sounds like a lot, but there are restrictions. Again, if anything's impermanent, it's very unlikely that we'd be able to fund that. So we have to look at who the stakeholders are and encourage others to open up their pocketbooks as well. These are local, very specific taxpayer dollars that are going to permanent art.
There's some chat going on about different foundations and some other things. I'm very curious if there's other resources locally. I mean, I would speak for Columbia. I know we've we've worked with nonprofits in the development of, I think on one of the MARTA stations in Atlanta, having a youth theater and dance facility and things like that, and like helping to integrate those types of resources into these larger redevelopments is certainly on the table. We don't know who might locally in Athens be looking to, you know, if there's a growing or a birthing program around celebrating the arts in a way that's not just public art, that might be performance art or otherwise, or what Broderick's talking about in terms of basically a really interesting, it reminds me of, I mean, just tutorship, right? I mean, of teaching the younger generation how to find a career in the arts, and interpreting history and a place's history into the art. Are there other organizations locally that we should know about? Visual art.
I do not know what their criteria is now, but we definitely would want to have a conversation with Sarah, with the Athens Area Community Foundation. That would be someone we would want to talk to, because theirs is mostly donor-driven grants, but this might be something a donor might be interested. Who said that? Okay. Sarah McKinney. Yes, there you go, Sarah. But I also want to take a moment, because I am going to have to leave. When we're talking about and putting all these ideas out there on the art and the sculpture and renaming streets, please let us find a place to acknowledge and recognize Reverend Maddox, who actually was the person that led for the development of Bethel.
Reverend Frank Maddox. Reverend Frank Maddox, not Charlie.
Charlie, you should have took it while you could.
Reverend Frank Maddox and Mr. Wilbur Jones were the driving forces in that.
Yeah, we need to make sure we have space. We create space for these two people.
And I also want to acknowledge I think Broderick, you've hit it on the head, and I just don't want to miss the fact that anything that's going on the site, we need to have close communication. I know we have a few residents on this call, but having resident participation in the decision making. I think Andrew in the chat, you acknowledged you're excited about that potential.
And again, all of our SPLOS projects would have a selection panel. We never, it's not just ACAC that chooses the art from the proposals we're given. And ideally, the selection panel would very much include residents.
Okay. We are officially 17 minutes past time. I know we are going to have a wrap-up call in about 45 minutes for all the sessions. So I'm sure Brian is going to go scurry away and try to put that together. But we're having great conversation. So other than me needing a refill and coffee, I'm not going anywhere if folks want to continue, or if we want to have a follow-up call. I know we had that suggested from another
I think it might I think this might warrant it, Christina, just like some of our other stuff. There's so much, as we dive into this, there's so much we're discovering that, you know, we may need to have another.
Okay. So I will look, I'll reach out to some of the folks on this call and see what we can do. I think our team has a lot to dig into for sure between now and then, so we can have a productive conversation. But what's the thought on the table right now? And I'm sorry, Jairus, if you have other slides, I'm sorry. I know we haven't gotten to
I'm enjoying the conversation.
The PowerPoint, right? Okay, so like the PowerPoint will be available for folks to click through, but the whole point was to have the conversation. So we're not really upset about not clicking through them all. Tommy, there are more ideas on there for public art and integration, but maybe we're not there yet. I think we're still defining a lot.
I just had one quick thing. I don't know whether we're going to continue or not, but I know that one thing that's been raised of interest lately, that is a history thing I just wanted out there, is we've had a few people contact us that on the site there's an artifact called a moon tree.
Yeah.
And I don't know how critical this is, but I'm hearing some laughter, so we might already know about this. But this has to do with the seedlings that were planted throughout the United States as part of the bicentennial program in 1976, and I think they were connected to the Apollo program. And so I don't know where it is compared to what you're trying to build, but we've had some people reach out to our organization recently about whether or not that tree would continue to stand.
So I could speak directly to that. It is outside the planning department. It came up on our civic uses conversation. And so it is being explored, as well as the history of the planning department, actually that building being originally the first integrated public library. And so there's some historic significance there, Tommy, that we probably need some more information from you on.
One of the ideas that even came out was taking seedlings from the tree and creating more trees. That was one of the concepts that I thought was really interesting.
But yeah, Tommy, it did come up over and over again. And I think there's definitely something that we'll work to incorporate. And from where I think it's located, I think it's in a spot where it can actually easily be saved and still redevelopment happening. But like John said, there's other kind of greater ideas, kind of that idea of seedlings. And there's also a few trees that came up in Bethel Village that people had some real sentimental, residents sit under. And so we're trying to note all those things. But
I actually have a conversation for Tommy. Tommy, this is Ovita. And maybe I should know the answer to this, since, maybe I should know the answer. But where is our discussion at with the developing the downtown historic district, and how does that fit in this conversation, or does it?
Sure, I'll share that real quick. So when we last left off on the West Downtown / Hot Corner Historic District, which is included in some of the maps, Christina, that you all have shown, we were intending to have a number of public sessions before you all went to vote. We were able to have one of those before COVID hit. And so I've just been reaching out. I'll reach out to you this week, because I know that the downtown demolition moratorium expires in November. And so we're excited to hear where the mayor and commission is on kind of bringing that to a vote. I'm so glad you brought that up, though, Vita, because one thing I just wanted to share is I know that you all said that you're downloading this transcript, but I'm sure you have so many transcripts and meetings to review. One thing I just wanted to have everyone in everyone's mind is, I mentioned the idea that it might be neat if you are going to have park areas or community centers or anything that earns a name to consider, and this is not it as opposed to or to replace Ovita's idea about the Reverend Maddox, but it may be in addition to. I brought up the idea of Athens' first two African-American elected officials, Alf Richardson and Madison Davis. Given the proximity to downtown, Madison Davis would be especially interesting one, because this area will be, you could throw a rock and hit the post office. And in addition to being one of the first elected officials in Athens, Madison Davis was actually the first Black postmaster in the United States of America. And he was appointed after he served as an elected official. And so he's someone who definitely deserves to be recognized in this area. Maybe that's something else that we can find.
And I just want to get one last thing in. We've talked a lot about that, but when Bethel Homes first came into being, there was a neighborhood grocery store. I don't mean a little bitty. It was a national chain called A&P. And it was where everybody there shopped. It was right there where I guess it's Georgia Power now or something, in that parking lot where Hull Dead ends. It was a chain store.
Where Hull Dead ends?
Yeah, not where Lumpkin Dead ends.
Okay.
Right.
Okay,
right
so where?
There was a huge chain grocery store, and the name of that one was A&P.
And I remember A&P when I lived in Philadelphia. So yeah, I do remember the A&P.
I remember, I grew up in North Carolina. I remember A&P too, so.
So I hate to cut us off, but I do think we're going to have another conversation and follow up. I'm going to put my email in the chat just so it's easily accessible. So if y'all have some things that maybe didn't make it to the chat and you're worried about it, you know, or you think of it later, please do email us. I will more than likely ask Ian to compile a lot of information that we learned on this call. So just keep the information coming, or ideas or links or anything, okay?
Absolutely. I'll be going through the chat and rewatching the video and making a list of all the references and resources and people to follow up with. So drop anything else in the chat and we'll be saving that.
Excellent. Any other final words from folks joining this morning? Okay, I want to thank everyone so much, and thank you to all of our special guests, and the conversation has been really amazing. Thank you, Buck and the residents there at the Bethel Community Center for joining. If anybody has any comments, please let me know. Kishan and Latasha have my info directly. Awesome, thank you.
Christina, just
yes,
remind them about, I think there's another slide that follows questions. Remind them about the website.
Absolutely.
Because you can make comments and add to what we've done here today at any time on the website, and that will get into the team.
Yeah, so there's a contact button there. You can always email us. It'll go to Brian and I, and then we can respond accordingly to the team members that are handling that. We're also going to link out to YouTube stations that are going to host all of these calls. So if you think it was an interesting conversation and you didn't see the folks on here that you wanted to, you can certainly forward them that link and say, watch this, give them feedback. And so please do visit the website. We're going to hopefully have all those up as soon as possible. And then also, if you guys could join us at noon, please do. We're going to do a quick wrap up. Whether you joined the previous sessions or not, you'll get the highlights of what we went over, and we'll review our next steps towards the master planning. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for everyone.
Yeah,
Great
thanks. Yeah, definitely great discussion.